Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Hello, Dad. Good morning. I really think the news is starting to confirm a lot of the things that we've been saying for a long time, or at least for me it's confirming, and so it's more and more evidence to our story that we're trying to share with people. And the first thing I need to mention today is how crazy all of a sudden my stories on Yahoo, the top stories picked just for you, have returned to being stories of, like they were before. For instance, today's story, Sunday the 10th of January, the top story, Paris reflects on a year of jihadists' outrages. U.S. bomber flies over South Korea as show of force against North. Will Iran and Saudi Arabia go into war? That's one of our stories I want to go into today, Dad. Bombs hamper troops 2 weeks after victory declared in Iraq's Ramadi. And Pope says he's a sinner in need of God's mercy. So anyway, that's quite a difference. No sports. There's only one pop culture story at the end. The Pope one, okay, fringy, but still the Poper. And otherwise, it's back on terror, war. I mean, where was all that the last 2 or 3 weeks? I've got them all in my inbox here, all the Yahoo daily stories just for me. And as I've said the last couple of weeks, it's uncanny the way they were always like this, for as long as I've been using them this year. And then all of a sudden, the last 2-3 weeks through the holidays, they went to something else. I don't think any of it's an accident. I don't say I know why, but anyway, so we're back to a whole list of top stories that were hidden beneath the pop culture stuff for the last few weeks. And one of them that's that I came across, Dad, that I want to start with, that's off the topic of the Middle East in the sense of the news that we're watching, but on topic in the sense of a lot of the context that we're watching is this. Let's see. Well, this article I pulled is from the Christian Science Monitor. This is the first one ever. You notice, Dad, I never go to the Christian Science Monitor. Why? Because anything with the name Christian in it freaks me out. So I know where the other people stand, and they're all mouthpieces. But the Christian Science Monitor, that's a scary one. Who knows what kind of monster lurks behind the editing and the story selection, or whoever's pulling the strings of the Christian Science Monitor. That's some sort of Frankenstein indeed. So anyway, but this one captured my attention because of the topic, and it was quite in depth. I grabbed it because there was a lot of information in this one compared to most of these mouthpieces. Anyway, the title is "In Treatment of Professor Wheaton shows split among U.S. evangelicals. So this topic of if people aren't aware of this, a Wheaton College professor made mention. Well, I should go to it because I was a little shocked after reading into the beginning of this that they've had need to fire this professor because a professor said something on her Facebook page. And I thought, people say some crazy things nowadays, and so perhaps she said something, really outrageous, and they had to fire her over this, saying that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. That's basically what she said. But so anyway, they have the quote here. Professor Hawkins' post announced that she would wear hijab as an act of Advent devotion, quoting her, Professor Hawkins, "I stand in religious solidarity with Muslims because they, like me, a Christian, are people of the book," she posted on December 10th, quote, "and as Pope Francis stated last week, we worship the same God." So this Christian college professor is quoting St. Francis and getting fired because the Christian college, I guess this is kind of funny. For those that have never been to our Bible study, the whole point of the Bible study is to show how full of crap most of Christianity is, and how, to undermine, I hope that our Bible study is the Bible study that undermines Christian Bible studies and tries to expose what it really means to study the Bible. But you wouldn't know that if you just saw Bible study. You'd be scared away like I am of Christian Science Monitor. But no, my Bible study is that's why it's called Truth Not Tradition. I should say our Bible study, because Dad's been doing it for many years, and it's to undermine the traditional viewpoint. Non-believers are going to hell, and so many things. The church is the bride of Christ, and there's just it's almost everything is misunderstood or misrepresented by Christianity. So anyway, I find this just, it's commie tragic, isn't it? To start off the week with this professor that's been fired for quoting the Pope. So the other part that I wanted to mention in this, if I can find it, Dad, I think this is the quote from the college. The college has said it was Hawkins' affirmation that Muslims and Christians share the same God, and not her decision to wear the hijab, that seemed to violate the college's statement of faith, which all members of the Wheaton community, including faculty and students, must sign and affirm. Okay, Dad, so that goes to why we do the Bible study the way we do. Look at how you talk about a scary initiation and limiting viewpoint, right? Officially limited viewpoint is what you get from Wheaton College. Quote, "While Islam and Christianity are both monotheistic, we believe there are fundamental differences between the two faiths, including that they teach about God's revelation to humanity, the nature of God, the path to salvation, and the life of prayer," the college explained in a statement defending its recommendation to terminate Hawkins. Quote, "As an institution of distinctively evangelical Christian identity, we affirm that salvation is through Christ alone." Now, the part that seems, the laughable part of all this to me, Dad, is that if there is only one God, there is only one God. Christians and Muslims are arguing over the appropriate manner, right? They acknowledge, how come this college isn't acknowledging what Sheikh Imran Hossein acknowledges? That what you find in the Quran is the acknowledgement that Jesus, the son of Mary, the Virgin, is the true Messiah of the Jews, and that the Jews killed him, or thought they killed him, and that God took him, and he'll come again. And he's the one that's going to confirm the Mahdi. He's the one that's going to rule forever. Why is it Sheikh Imran Hossein knows that, and Wheaton College doesn't know that? That they don't know that if there is a God, a single God, as opposed to gods, in the the theological sense, well then, of course there's only one. Of course we worship the same God through different means. Now, the place of Jesus Christ in that, okay, is that where we differ? Right. So Catholics and Protestants, so they have a right to be slaughtering each other over that? Or is that just, an argument that continues in love, theoretically, until the Lord returns, or the Mahdi returns, or no one returns, or King David or Elijah, or, why can't we just love each other like, if we're Christians, that's what Jesus told us to do. If we're Muslims, we're told to respect Christians, right? And Jews. People, have the wrong idea, Dad, of Muslims. And it's a good lead-in today, I think, to where I've been, anticipating now for so many months. I see that it's just more stuff coming true that we've been talking about. I don't know what New York Times has been saying. They've been wrong about everything else the last few years, but I don't know what they're saying about this. Are they still talking about Arab terrorists that hijacked 4 planes and flew them into American targets? Are they still talking about an Arab Spring that resulted in the freedom and democracy of those people, self-rule? Come on. Are they still talking about ISIS, the terrorist organization that's coming to get everybody? So that's what we're going to talk about today, Dad. I wanted to touch on this because this really goes to the fact of how Christians are playing into this whole Third World War and everything that's going on, because, even from an official level, they're blind and don't know anything about their scripture or the Islamic scripture. They, just like education, it's a deep thing what I'm saying. I'm not just throwing out some accusation. I'm premising it with the idea that ever since someone like John Calvin in the 1500s, the idea has been that the population is dangerous and stupid and damned in the sense of Calvin. 90% of the people, go read Calvin. Go find out what he said. Are damned before they're even born. That's just the way God has it. God's saving about 10% or whatever it is, that small percentage. Everybody else is damned. And if you're part of the small percentage, justifiable sinning. You can't stay out of heaven. You're God's representative. You're God's messenger. You're God's arm to carry out what needs to be done on the earth. That's why the religious nuts can do all the slaughter in the name of God. And if you're part of the 90%, well, sorry, nothing, there's no amount of prayer, no amount of good works, no amount of repentance, nothing can save you. That was Calvin's perspective. Okay, and then, so that coming through the Prussian interpretation of obeying the state and the military, creating people that don't question, these little people that are damned, that are lost, that are wrong, that are bad, they're evil. They don't question. They do what they're told. They follow what they're told to do. And so that's where the education system comes from. Go do your history. Go to our site, Thinkorswim, and check out, whether you go to our site or not, check out John Taylor Gatto. probably the greatest educator America's ever had. And he's retired for 25 years now, and he's getting pretty old. But he's been on tour for 25 years, and all his tour material is out there on YouTube. John Taylor Gatto, Gatto. And you see a history of education. And, you know, what it was all about. It's not about educating people. They were more educated before modern compulsory education came into being, when 12-year-olds started their own business. When teenagers and pre-teenagers led regiments of armies and led, commanded people on ships and all sorts of things. What we would call children of 12, 13, 14, 15. By 16, they were established human beings with, people like Thomas Edison, Ben Franklin, George Washington, all these kind of people. That's what they were doing a couple hundred years ago before compulsory education. And what were they reading? Shakespeare, right? Dante. What were they reading? Virgil and Homer. So, I don't know. Call us progressive. Ha ha. I just got back from Budapest, Hungary. My first glimpse of Europe. And to see these buildings, which, the stuff that's there now, other than the few eyesores that were built in the last 20 or 30 years, most of the city that you see today and go through today is about 100 years old or so. The cathedrals and all these things, most of them, the bridges that they built in the mid 1800s that were finished, most of them just about the time we're always talking about, Dad, this last 100-year period. Budapest came online right about the 1890s. Through the early 1900s. And so all that stuff's 100 to 150 years old. That's the new stuff built on top of the stuff that's been there since the 15th century, since the medieval times, and even since the Roman times. So it's, it's really neat to see, the depth of the culture and all that. And so, it makes me think of my own country and my own cities and my own way of life and the way they build. And wow, it all looks like paper mache. It looks like it's ready to just blow away. And that's all part of our deeper picture of a world that they're building that can be blown away and rebuilt, because they know that it's temporary. They knew when they did the dollar scheme that it would last as long as it would last. Remember, the dollar came along after this supposed letter from Pike about the 100-year, or not 100-year, the 3 World War plans. It's been around for about 100 years or so. So it's interesting how all that sort of fits tidily together. The Federal Reserve of America that they'd been trying to push through since about the time of the letter finally gets pushed through in 1913. And, within a few years, you're World War I. So, and the whole banking connection, before that's not hard to trace from the things I've seen. I mean, I'm convinced that from the 1600s, when the Rothschilds borrowed the money through the Vatican banking system and set up their banking system, the 5-pointed banking system, the suns all over Europe, and started their banking cartel. No one else has had banking. No, where else does all the money flow from into today's money? Russia. Who funded Russia? And then looted them and then rebuilt them. Come on. People, they've got oil. Yeah, okay, they've got oil, but they were infiltrated long before oil was, when horses and chariots were still being fought with. And so was pretty much everywhere. And then the Middle East, that's part of where I want to lead into now today, Dad, is because what I'm seeing in what's going on this week is Iran and Saudi Arabia. And that brings us right into our modern 100 years with, The kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as we've talked about many times, has been set up instead of the caliphate that they promised the Hashemites, excuse me, in Syria and Iraq of the time. When I say the time, I mean 100 years ago, for helping England defeat the Ottoman Empire, World War I. They promised the Hashemite king a caliphate in that territory, and then took it back a month later and gave him, Iraq at the time, until his family was murdered. When I say his, the family of today, King Abdullah of Jordan and his father, Hussein, who's passed away. They were the only ones left out of the Hashemite family that was ruling Iraq in the 50s. And so when you look at what was going on in the 50s, I can't help but to think that was sponsored by good old, Western interests, the same cabal of bankers, which you might even call European interests if you want, Western interests, Santa Claus Christianity interests, ultimately. So when you look at from World War I and the establishment of Saudi Arabia, where the money went there instead to make that our partner, not the kingdom of Hashemites, who not we, but England, the Western powers, just screwed out of Syria and Damascus and the rule of all the Muslims. See? And they divided it. The Hashemites got one side, and these radical, because the Hashemites were the moderates that were going with England, and they made this radical side in Saudi Arabia, and then Iran comes in at least from what I've learned, in the 50s after World War II. Now, when they start plotting, how to control the world, and we know they were plotting that when you go back and look at some of the record of the think tanks that were going on at the time, right? What they called Stone Mountain, Dad, in the 60s, where they were trying to figure out what do you do in a time of peace? How do you remain the superpower if you're not at war with everybody? And the Stone Mountain Report, as it became known, essentially said you can't. If you're not at war with everybody, you need some threat. There has to be some threat. Spaceships, aliens, the world's gonna, climate change, the world's gonna die. There has to be some threat if you're to keep people, homogenized, if that's the wrong word, but it's the one that comes to mind. If you're to keep people sort of centralized around a government or a system or something to keep them safe. If you have peace in the world, you have sort of more freedom, more personal freedom to do what you want, go where you want, experience what other people have to offer, choose what you want. And it's harder to keep standing armies and cohesive societies, economies ruled by a small group. And even, Dad, if we look at it from the standpoint of Carroll Quigley, Professor Quigley, and his Tragedy and Hope book of 1966, that viewpoint is of a small group of bankers who have the power to rule like Rome ruled, through money in the modern day, and that they're in the process of doing and have been. And so, anyway, all of that plays into this, because now it brings us into the modern day where, Christianity has been so purposely made blind, in my view, that you got even especially the big Christian colleges firing a professor for pointing out what, to me, is an obvious argument. The deeper argument never changes. You can't prove Jesus raised from the dead because somebody said it 2,000 years ago and you believe it. Just like the Muslims can't prove that what Muhammad said is true. They have their evidence, and it, to me, it rings true because the whole thing rings of that same factor of prophecy. Too many things that were said that were going to come to pass. That I've learned from Sheikh Hossein about Islamic eschatology. Too many things that they expect and have seen in history based on what he elaborates or interprets from the scriptures, his scriptures, the Quranic scriptures. And so when I see how uncannily similar those are, I think, well, come on, that's just, they descend from the same book ultimately with the Old Testament stories, right? They know that they descend from Abraham. They have a different read on it based on the books that have come to them. And what's so funny is how those books don't paint a vividly different picture whatsoever, especially to the Christian explanation. That's what's so uncanny. They come from the Jewish explanation, and yet right where the Jews and Christians divide, so do the Jews and the Muslims. That's what's so weird, that the Muslims aren't also waiting for a different Messiah to come. That's just the Christian misunderstanding in the modern world. That's not what they're waiting for. Their Mahdi is their righteous leader. Why not? Why can't that be? They're waiting for their righteous leader, and the Christians are waiting for the return of Jesus. So why not? The Jews are still waiting for their Messiah. We all got different scriptures. Why not? We're the only ones that believe in the one God. And that's what this came down to with this professor being fired. I mean, to me, the obvious part is that, obviously there is one God, so we all believe in the same God. That's an easy statement. The hard statement is, how is it that we believe differently, that we have different stories of this one God that we believe in? That's the argument. So anyway, I find it quite enlightening, Dad, that this top Christian college, seems to know jack crud about Christian scripture or Islamic scripture, and probably nothing about eschatology. So anyway, let's get into the stuff that's going on this week. From the 10th, from today, the World Post, a partnership of the Huffington Post and Berggruen Institute, comes one titled, this is from Trita Parsi, President, National Iranian American Council. The privilege Saudi Arabia enjoyed under U.S.-led order in the Middle East is over. Dad, do you know that? The U.S.-led order in the Middle East is over? I mean, that's kind of odd when you're the military that's been around now, for 100 years or whatever, and at least 50 since World War II, unrivaled. And you've had your hands in over there. I haven't forgotten where I'm going with Iran and Saudi Arabia, because that's what this has really got to do with. Iran, where our hands have been since World War II, practically, at least in the 50s, and Saudi Arabia, where they've been all the way back since World War I and the establishment of the whole regime, and some neat things in these articles. That's why I was hoping to read them, because there's so much in these articles. I think this is the hinge now of everything we've been talking about and anticipating is coming out or being revealed more this week in these articles. There's a couple of them about what's going on with Saudi Arabia and Iran. And so, but I find it funny that our army over there, and we've been at war, Afghanistan, Iraq, we uprooted Mubarak, the one we've been supporting all those years in Egypt. NATO, who's NATO? Everybody agrees America is NATO. They don't do anything we don't want to do. We don't bite our nails and go, oh no, NATO's uprooting Libya and Gaddafi. That's going to create problems for us and for our order in the Middle East. Oh no, what do we do? So, Libya, we're behind all this, and yet we're going to imagine that our U.S.-led order in the Middle East is over. I was just talking a couple of weeks ago about how our friend that sent us the article about the campaign over there in Jordan every year, where we go do the, show our strength there with the something lion, eager lion or young lion or whatever the heck it is. And we go have our training drills, 5,000 troops this year, our troops, American troops, joining the Jordanians to show how strong we are. Well, wait till you hear what Saudi Arabia's got. If you think Jordan's got some troops, wait to hear the arms and stuff that we give Saudi Arabia all these years. So, all of this is so pertinent to how this Middle East is playing out, how it comes to pass. And I'm seeing it all as playing right into the hands of the Sunni Shia civil war that Sheikh Imran Hussein turned me on to a few months ago, that I've been now watching for. And the way we're watching for the rise of the little horn, and how Daniel, the prophecies of Daniel, seem to indicate that this final ruler that goes against Israel, we know he'll rule Egypt, but it sounds like he'll also rule Saudi Arabia, or he will take. And in the Revelation part about this white horse, this righteous warrior that's given a crown of honor and goes forth conquering and to conquer. One of the things we've been talking about for 20 years or more is how Saudi Arabia is always the one that seems to be indicated in the prophecy as the one that this little horn that rises up will go forth conquering and to conquer the oiliest regions. And so interesting now. So keep that in mind as we read through these articles, Dad. So this one out of a Huffington Post partnership from Trita Parsi, the president of National Iranian American Council, the privilege Saudi Arabia enjoyed under U.S.-led order in the Mideast is over. This is from posted on January 8th. At his first press conference after getting elected, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani singled out Saudi Arabia as the country his government would try particularly hard to build friendly relations with. He even referred to Saudis as Iran's brothers. Things didn't turn out quite as Rouhani had hoped. Middle Eastern geopolitics have changed dramatically since the mid-1990s, when Rouhani had helped engineer a Saudi-Iran rapprochement. The Iraq war had caused Saudi to lose both faith in American intentions and competence. The Arab Spring, and what the Saudis viewed as the betrayal of Egypt's Hosni Mubarak by the U.S., convinced Riyadh that Washington would no longer uphold its promise to secure and protect pro-Western Arab dictators. Moreover, by refraining from using military force against Syrian President Bashar Assad, America had proved that its desire to avoid new wars in the Middle East superseded its hegemonic obligations to uphold security and stability in the region. It looks to the Saudis like America has simply abandoned its ally. Now remember, Dad, I see all this in a wag the dog fashion, right? The Saudis have been America's puppet since before, they were England's puppet government. When you find out in either this article or the other one how much weapons they get and how they survive solely on our weapons and all that, there's no idea that that they do anything other than what they're told, that we both work in each other's interest when it comes to that relationship. When it says by refraining from military force against Assad, that's got nothing to do with them, and they know it. They're on a whole different program. that's just all wag the dog for us out here in media world, is what I'm saying. I say read between the lines, and they're trying to paint Saudi Arabia's already seeing the writing on the wall, right, Dad? I mean, that's what I see in it. They're telling us that Saudi Arabia has already seen the fact that we didn't spare Hosni Mubarak, and we don't want to use military force against Bashar al-Assad. So, we're willing to let our friends go down if that's what has to be done. That's what they just said here, right? It looks like to the Saudis, like America simply abandoned its ally. Moreover, Saudi oil has lost its lure. Now, this I don't buy for a minute, Dad, just so you know. This next part, I think, is all wag the dog, absolutely opposite of the reality. Moreover, Saudi oil has lost its lure. The U.S. has significantly increased its own oil production and reduced its dependence on Saudi oil. And as a result of the Iran nuclear deal, which Saudi Arabia vehemently opposed, Iranian oil will soon return to the world markets. Many states are planning to reduce their dependency on Saudi oil by shifting some of their consumptions towards Iranian crude. That's just all. I say bull, 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 bull. How much oil is America making? We're fracking, for gosh sakes. It's just, whether we had more oil or not, oil is oil in this world. And unless it was completely running out everywhere, in which case that territory might not be so important. So I say that's all cover story for, oh my God, everybody's after Saudi oil. And both Iranian oil and Saudi oil. That's why these are the two that are being pitted against each other. But the fact that Iranian oil will come back onto the markets, I mean, Saudi's our buddy. We'd only be hurting Saudi Arabia if it was good. They trade that oil for guns. And so why are we hurting Saudi Arabia is the real question. And they're pointing out they already see how we betray our allies. So I'm pointing out that it's got to do with the fact that if we're looking at this good Sunni king's going to come, and the prophecy of Daniel's been read right all along by Dr. Scott, and then the way we've been interpreting it for many years, he's going to take the Saudi Arabia and Egypt, in all this lead up to World War III. That's sort of setting up that idea in this, I think. That's what I'm getting at with all this. Anyway, and then, of course, Iran is no longer checked geopolitically by Saddam Hussein in Iraq and the Taliban government in Afghanistan. That's funny. The two people we took out said they're not checked anymore, Dad. We took out Saddam Hussein, who we gave the weapons to check Iran, and we supported the Taliban government at one point in Afghanistan to check Iran. And then we went out and took them both out. But we didn't do that. We did that not understanding that would leave Iran unchecked. I mean, you think so, Dad? Did we leave Iran unchecked on purpose then? Or did we already have a backup plan? Or is Iran really not unchecked? What I don't believe is that we just, oh, geez, look at that, darn it. We had to go after Saddam Hussein because he had weapons of mass destruction. No, he didn't. We had to go after Afghanistan. They were harboring terrorists. No, they weren't. I mean, it's been 15 years. It took up until ISIS for there to be terrorism in the world again. So, what did they have? That we had to start a war for 15 years and destroy these two countries. So anyway, Iran's no longer checked geopolitically by Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Taliban government in Afghanistan. Add to that the lifting of sanctions on Iran, which, quote, may be days away, according to U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, and it becomes clear why Riyadh fears that its geopolitical decline will be exacerbated by Iran's ascendancy. Despite this dramatically altered geopolitical map, the Rouhani government did attempt to mend fences with Saudi Arabia. Rouhani appointed Admiral Shamkhani as the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, Iran's equivalent of National Security Advisor. Shamkhani, who is ethnically Arab, received Saudi Arabia's highest medal in 2004, the Order of Abdulaziz Al Saud, for his efforts to improve relations with the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. The thinking appears to have been, at least in part, that Shamkhani was the best suited official to orchestrate Iranian outreach to Saudi. Apparently the article is going to go on to point out that they haven't done it now with this newest thing. They're at war. This is what I wanted to get at, Dad, because let's see. Part of Iran's problem in dealing with Saudi Arabia is Riyadh's inherent sense of insecurity rooted in its dependence on the U.S. and the outsourcing of its security to Washington. As Iranian academic Nasir Hadian points out, Saudi Arabia outspends Iran on arms by a factor of 6, right? Saudi Arabia outspends Iran on arms by a factor of 6. Its military has the most modern American weaponry. It is the key state in the Gulf Cooperation Council, a body that was created to balance Iran's power. Okay, Dad? So, and no one talks about Saudi Arabia in the sense of if they go rogue. I mean, I don't get it. Iran doesn't have a single nuclear weapon. You know, India does. Pakistan does. Yeah, Israel does. Saudi Arabia's got 6 times the weapons or the military spending and all the modern American weaponry. What makes Iran so, what is Iran doing exactly that makes them such a threat? When you run Saudi Arabia over there, I'm saying when you run as this Western cabal, whether it's a Zionistic plot, whether it's a European banker plot, whether it's American multinationals, whoever runs the American military, let's say, and Mossad, right? That's who's got control of the world, kind of. And so whoever, who pays them, where's the money come from? What makes Iran such a big threat? I mean, you're running Saudi Arabia and Jordan on the other side, who we just talked about how much troops and guns are in Jordan, and Israel. So, and then you had Egypt before you disrupted it. You had Libya being a good boy, no big radicalism going on in Libya. You had a 6th best standard of living in the world, maybe, or in Europe, and best in Africa. And Libya all happy to welcome Jews and go along with everything. So it's interesting, all these governments that were toppled around governments that are still in place, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, that have all the weapons, Israel, and yet we're worried about, Iran. And Saudi Arabia is worried about being cut off from America because of Iran. And yet, what's Iran got? Saudi Arabia is the one that went and attacked Yemen. Iran's defending Yemen. You find out in these articles, Iran, they say, is fighting all these proxy wars, right? And that's where I see the strings being pulled, Dad. Where are they getting the money to fight all these proxy wars? This country that was sanctions against it and all this kind of stuff, and they're fighting proxy wars. Everywhere, Yemen and different, and what is it? Shias. This is what I'm trying to get to today, Dad. The Shia Sunni thing that's being seen now quite clearly, and they're presenting it in these articles. That's why I wanted to read a bunch of it, because they're presenting it in the way Saudi Arabia and Iran are threatening each other now. So they're pointing out this, this power struggle. Saudi Arabia's got all the money spent on arms and the American arms, but they're afraid if America cuts them off, right? Thus, Iran's power or military capabilities cannot explain Saudi Arabia's sense of insecurity. See, because Saudi's got all the guns and the money. Rather, Hadian argues, Saudi's sense of vulnerability is inherent in the very political nature of the Saudi regime. The fact that it is renting its security from the U.S., which incidentally is increasingly reluctant to provide that protection. A tenant will never enjoy the same sense of security as a homeowner, so to say. This leaves Iran with limited options, as there is little Tehran can do to alleviate Saudi Arabia from this innate uncertainty, Hadian maintains. See? Saudi Arabia is just dependent on what America does with them. What is the solution to the Saudi-Iranian conflict then? There are no obvious short-term solutions available. Rather, the first step must be to contain tensions and ensure that they don't spill over into other areas. Second, there must be a recognition that the Middle East suffers from a diplomacy deficit. The limited diplomacy that exists must be strengthened. The recent Saudi-Iranian escalation cannot be permitted to collapse the existing diplomatic activity, particularly not the Syrian negotiations. Well, expectations on what, and that's funny, they bring in the Syrian, though it can't be allowed to disrupt. What's it got to do with Syria, I wonder? They never mention. While expectations on what the Syria talks can achieve must be tempered, the fact that all key outside players are at the table is an important achievement in and of itself. Neither the execution of a Shia cleric nor the sacking of an embassy, however unacceptable, can be permitted to scuttle the fragile Syria talks. Third, the rhetoric must cool down on both sides, and the Iranian government must ensure that the vigilantes torching the Saudi embassy are brought to trial and punished. Iran has a shameful history of failing to protect foreign embassies, and any failure to bring the perpetrators to justice will be perceived as a lack of sincerity in reducing tensions with Saudi Arabia. Fourth, the permanent members of the UN Security Council must pressure both sides to de-escalate and, if possible, explore opportunities to mediate the conflict. Chinese President Xi Jinping is scheduled to visit Iran and Saudi Arabia later this month. Mindful of the strong relations China enjoys with both of these Persian Gulf powerhouses, and mindful of China's own interest in stability in the region, Beijing may be able to play a helpful role in defusing tensions. In the long run, however, sustainable security can only be ensured if a new inclusive security architecture is established for the region. This is what I wanted to get to, Dad, today, because it gets even clearer, I think, if I remember right, in the other article, or in a couple of other ones, if I can get to them today now. In the long run, however, sustainable security can only be ensured if a new inclusive security architecture is established for the region. Any power that is excluded will develop an interest in undermining the region's security precisely because its interests are not respected. This is why the U.S.-led order for the region, established in the 1990s, was bound to collapse. It was based on the exclusion of two of the region's most powerful states, Iran and Iraq, and could only be sustained as long as the U.S. was willing to pay for it through its own blood and treasure. But until now, Saudi Arabia has sought to prevent Iran from being rehabilitated in the region's security structure. It opposed Iran's inclusion in the Syria talks, for instance, and only reluctantly agreed to partake after pressure from President Obama. Friends of Saudi Arabia need to intervene once more and convince Riyadh of the inevitable. Iran is part of the region. It is a major power, and long-term stability necessitates its inclusion in any security order. The influence and privilege Saudi Arabia enjoyed under American order will no longer be the same, because that order is no more. So I think that's important, Dad, that that's what they're pointing out. The order is no more. American order, it's up for grabs. See, and I think that's why this bad caliph, good caliph now, the good Sunni leader has to come in, the one that wants to make friends with the Shias ultimately, wants to make partners or whatever. He wants to make partners with everybody, I think. He's going to make good with the Jews, with the Christians, share the mount, give the Jews the right to resume the temple, and all these extremist elements. And that's what Saudi Arabia is going to be put down to at that point. See, this is all the build up to that. Saudi Arabia will be put down to an extremist element. And that's why security can't be had until, what does it say? Sustainable security can only be ensured if a new, inclusive security architecture is established for the region. What does that say? New, inclusive security architecture? 10-toed kingdom, Dad? Everybody giving their power for an hour to the king for one purpose, right? Going back to the prophetic sort of insights into that. Right? They're all going to have one purpose for a short time. See, because there has to be this caliph. There has to be this everybody coming together. He has to get back the caliph that he was promised 100 years ago. And like you sent me that article, they've got the, the new caliph banner all drawn up for the region. So anyway, that's the first article. And since I might not have time, I'll go right to the other one of this. And it's from the same people, strangely enough. Huffington Post Politics from January 10th, but this is a different article. It was posted the next day on January 9th by Dr. Mahid. I don't know if you pronounce the J. In Spanish, it would be Mahid. Rafizadeh, president of the International American Council. So interesting, right? The day before this article was posted by Trita Parsi, president, National Iranian American Council. And then this one is Dr. Mahid Rafizadeh, president of the International American Council. Anyway, will Iran and Saudi Arabia go into war? So that's right where headlines are at already, Dad. And this is Huffington Post stuff. This is not, total outside. It's perhaps alternative, but it's mainstream alternative. So I want to read some of this. First, it was the Egyptian embassy. Second, the American embassy, later Denmark. Then the British embassy was ransacked by mostly Basijis. And now it is the turn of Saudi Arabia's embassy to be attacked by crowds of Iranians. What kind of diplomacy is Rouhani's government referring to? These kinds of assaults on foreign embassies and diplomats have several dimensions. They appear to be systematic reaction as they follow strong remarks from Iran's supreme leader. Iranian media outlets normally refer to these attackers as passionate young people or, quote, followers of the imam's route, rather than aggressors. In addition, it is intriguing that Iranian forces, which are very quick at identifying demonstrations, are always late to act when it comes to these types of pre-organized and sophisticated attacks on embassies. Moreover, the perpetrators of these attacks generally attempt to show their loyalty to the ideals of the Supreme Leader and the Islamic Republic's revolutionary principles. As a member of Iran's semi-militia group, the Basiji pointed out, quote, "We will stand by the Supreme Leader against any country which he views as the enemy." After the strong and provocative rhetoric from Iran's supreme leader on his social media outlets and website, and after he urged, quote, the Muslim world, quote, to act, an Iranian crowd broke into the Saudi embassy chanting slogans against Saudi Arabia. They ransacked, smashed furniture and windows, and set fire to the building. Another crowd attacked the Saudi consulate in the city of Mashhad and tore the Saudi flag. Has assaulting embassies turned into an inherent and symbolic tactic in the Islamic Republic's political establishment to indirectly express Tehran's rivalry toward other countries and show disrespect to them. The Islamic Republic, which considers itself the leader of the Islamic world, the underlying issue which should be addressed is Iran's escalating sectarian agenda in the region and its heightened military interventions in other nations. It is incumbent on other nation states to have a proportionate response to these issues. Otherwise, latest developments can escalate the regional conflict into conflagration. I mean, all of a sudden, right? I mean, does it sound to you, Dad? Iran's being painted like a bad, they instigated these things against the Saudi government. Last I read, Saudi Arabia beheaded or hung a Shia cleric along with 46 other people, Shias and people accused of being part of Al-Qaeda. Something, America's not too big on. Most countries all about freedom of democracy and such. Not so big on, but our buddy Saudi Arabia starts the year by killing 47 people. And, is it not natural that maybe some of the people in Iran would go nuts? I mean, it is 20 million people in Tehran. That's a big city. Without the supreme leader having to instigate them. Doesn't say that he instigated that, funny enough, in these lip service media outlets. The only quote is the Muslim world, right? After the strong and provocative rhetoric from Iran's supreme leader on his social media outlets and website. What? I mean, exactly what? Strong and provocative rhetoric. This guy's the supreme leader of the most strict Islamic world, who sees America as, the great deceiver, who sees Israel as a false state, terrorist state in the region, two things that seem to be true in the big picture. So, the fact that he's calling a spade, okay, and after he urged, quote, the Muslim world, unquote, he urged, quote, the Muslim world to act. An Iranian crowd broke into the Saudi embassy. Now, I don't know, that either that's bad journalism or I'm not. Did he exactly say that they should act in that way, or did they take it apart, on themselves? So I also understand they've been arrested for that. So I don't know how that's all really going down, but the journalism seems pretty weak. Whether the leader asked them to do that, it seems pretty reasonable that when you go execute people's, in the world, that there's nothing you can do after the execution. That's very drastic. So drastic response seems reasonable. It doesn't say they killed anybody at these embassies, right? They just attacked the embassy. Now, if they killed people at the embassy, that's pretty bad. But if they just, I don't know, took over the embassy or looted it or broke the windows or to show their, absolute outrage, I mean, that seems almost civilly reasonable to me, anyway, as response. So anyway, has assaulting embassies turned into an inherent and symbolic tactic? So there's some good stuff in this article. That's why I wanted to get to this, Dad. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps and its elite branch, the Quds Force, has significantly increased their influence in various Arab nations through boots on the ground, military assistance, and Shiite proxies. Iran's support for militia groups across the region has exponentially increased. While one country, Iran, supports approximately 25% of world's designated terrorist groups, overwhelming majority of Iranian-backed groups are in the Middle East. This follows that the IRGC and Quds forces are currently the forerunners of financing, arming, and backing militia groups in the Middle East. See, Dad, getting an idea who ISIS is fighting? I mean, this is what I'm trying to get to after everything we've been watching. To me, it's all very confirming. Aha, so now you're showing me, who ISIS has been fighting all this time. The people Iran's been funding, these groups, which are Shia groups that have their strongholds in these different parts of the country. So watch this now. Iran, let's see, wait a minute, where was I? So they're being accused of funding 25% of the world's designated terrorist groups, which of course half of those are probably groups that the rest of the world would designate the rightful rulers, like in the Ukraine or these in other countries, where it's always the freedom fighters that America backs that are the ruthless killers that are trying to overthrow the government, like in Syria. So anyway, I want to stay with this for a second, Dad. This follows that the IRGC and Quds forces are currently the forerunners of financing, arming, and backing militia groups in the Middle East. According to the report by the State Department, even under the presidency of the moderate Hassan Rouhani, Iran's state sponsorship of terrorism worldwide remained undiminished. Iran has not even begun taking serious actions against senior al-Qaeda leaders who are in the Islamic Republic. So it's the way I'm seeing it, this undiminished sponsorship of terrorism worldwide means that any of these Shia movements that won't budge on the Sunni territory that we want to give back to the Sunni Caliphate, the area that's been promised, places like Yemen, Iraq, Iran, Syria, and that's why Iran, I think, is mobilized, because ultimately that's what the fight comes to. Iran is part of the territory that the good king's gonna take over. All of it probably is the idea at some point. That's where World War III is going to come in. Iran has not even begun taking serious actions against senior al-Qaeda leaders who are in the Islamic Republic. Iran is assisting the Alawite regime of Assad militarily, financially, with advisors and intelligence against the Sunni oppositional groups. The IRGC forces are increasing their influence in Iraq, fueling the Shiite versus Sunni tensions by supporting the Shiite militia groups and the Shiite ruling clerics. Supporting the Shiite militia groups and Shiite ruling clerics. Ruling clerics, Dad. These people that have rule over territory that's being bombed for a year by America and ISIS. Tehran is interfering in Yemen's domestic affairs through their support for the Houthis. Remember I was talking about, because of course the Houthis are the Shias, and Saudi Arabia has been paid to bomb them with these sophisticated, we went over that several weeks back, when it turned out that the bombs Saudi Arabia is using are like these cluster bombs, these things that are outlawed for America to use. Our people won't allow us to use those bombs, but we don't realize it's okay that we sell them to Saudi Arabia to use on Shia Muslims in Yemen. I mean, that's how bad the world is out there right now, though. I mean, why it's coming to World War III. We're hid from it, especially, I guess, during Christmas time, Dad, when all of a sudden none of those things were on my radar. It was all pop culture stuff, and whole different world of what the Kardashians are doing. All of a sudden, they're not on there this week. I assume the Kardashians are still getting into trouble, but instead we're back to this stuff. So Iran's been assisting Assad. That's why Iran's a terrorist funder, see, against the Sunni oppositional groups, which include ISIS. The IRGC forces are increasing their influence in Iraq, fueling the Shiite-Sunni tensions by supporting the Shiite militia groups and the Shiite ruling clerics. Tehran is interfering in Yemen's domestic affairs through their support for the Houthis. In Bahrain and Lebanon, Iranian leaders continue to influence domestic politics and incite instability by their support of Shiite groups. See, incite instability. When's that been going on all my life, Dad? How long have we been talking about the instability in Yemen, Bahrain, Lebanon? When did that start going on, if not during this Arab Spring and into this modern civil war in Syria and war with ISIS, which I say is all this preparatory loosening up of the territory now for the Sunni caliphate that's going to be given to the Hashemite king. The nuclear deal between the P5+1 countries and the Islamic Republic will further boost Tehran's ability to spread its influence. If the international community or a regional coalition do not take serious action, Iran will further consolidate its hegemonic influence in other nations and continue to create political realities out of its proxies, i.e. the Shiite militia groups. See, Dad? And I see that's where we've got what we've got going on right now, our wars that are going on, and then what we've got with our going forth conquering and to conquer, this good king that brings with him war and famine and death. Who could that be on but these Shias, is what I'm imagining. Unless that's, as I said, I'm torn. That could also refer to what's going on with Israel. If that means going forth, he's this white king. He looks like he's good and righteous and all that, and they make him their Messiah, and he goes forth conquering and to conquer Jerusalem, and he brings with him war and famine and death on Jerusalem, and it refers to that. I'm still undecided. I think the scripture could play out both ways, but meanwhile we in what we're watching in the history of it still have to be watching for the rise of this king that's going to be the caliph and take over for these bad guys. And I say that why we still have to keep getting more of the threat. Things have to get worse. I've been saying that for a long time. So what I say that these articles are pointing out is how Saudi Arabia is in a bad position in this new place, and Iran. Both these things sort of point in, right, that Iran's got, they're spreading out their military all over the place. So their trouble is what I'm seeing. They've got trouble written on it. Of course, everybody else, Israel and such, are screaming, "Don't make the nuclear deal because in 10 years they'll be able to bring trouble." Well, that just happens to be right about the timing we're looking at for this World War III and Armageddon thing. So, anyway, I see all that falling into place. The Shia-Sunni civil war, the Saudi Arabia being set up to fall to the good Sunni king, and the eventual war, coming through Iran and Russia. And now Russia's in the news. I don't think I have time, Dad, this week. I'll point out the articles, though. Maybe we got time for one more thing. I'm not sure which is the most important. North Korea warns of war over South's propaganda broadcasts, right? North Korea's warning a war. I wanted to read that to point out, it's so funny, these people did, North and South Korea, again, who's funding them going to war? It pointed out that the impoverished North Korea in this article. Impoverished North Korea is how they spoke of North Korea. You know, they're going to war with South Korea. So anyway, to me it sounds like people are stimulating the people to pull the strings. I wanted to use that article in a little bit more detail to show what I see as a real pulling the strings nature of the world right now, that these countries that are, primarily farming countries, where do they get the money in their impoverished nations to build hydrogen bombs, test hydrogen bombs, and go to war with each other and build militaries? Why is that where their little bit of money is going, unless, somebody's telling them that's where they need to spend their money? Who is threatening them, and why isn't the United Nations, why aren't the different treaties being protected on a United Nations level so that countries like that didn't have to build wars, didn't have to build bombs and go to war, unless that's what you wanted? I mean, it's just more evidence toward the Carol Quigley world, or, any of these kind of, the idea of a sort of a banking cartel that funds both sides and lives for war. United Nations peace treaties, all these things are really just code for keeping the wars going so that the same people can stay in charge. Okay, so anyway, the article I wanted to try and read some of, Dad, that bring Russia into it, was out of the Atlantic. And it's from January 8th, just 2 days ago, the title of which is "The Danger of Putin Losing in Syria. If Russia's military adventure unravels, what happens next?" And it's by Dominic Tierney. And it says, last September, Russia deployed dozens of jets to Syria to rescue the ailing regime of Bashar al-Assad. Vladimir Putin aimed to protect one of Moscow's few foreign allies and gain leverage for the coming peace negotiations over the Syrian civil war. Russian media presented the mission as a heroic attempt to save the civilized world from Islamic terrorism. In Washington, however, Putin was widely seen as wading into a quagmire. According to The Economist, quote, "If America's Syria watchers agree on anything, it's that the Russian campaign, which has enabled Mr. Assad's forces to make only minor gains, will fail, and thereby encourage Russia to give up on its proxy. That would be a huge boost to the UN-backed peace talks John Kerry, the Secretary of State, is brokering, with the aim of replacing Mr. Assad with a transitional government early next year." But would a loss for Putin really be good news? Well, it's tempting to take satisfaction in the Russian president's travails in Syria, what you might call Putin-Freud. Syria watchers should question their assumptions. If Putin's military adventure unravels, the result may not be peace. It's certainly easy to imagine the Russian intervention deteriorating. In recent weeks, Assad's forces have made some limited gains around the Syrian city of Aleppo, but the overall strategic situation for Damascus remains highly precarious. Last year, the Syrian regime suffered a string of battlefield defeats, and Assad publicly admitted to fatigue and a lack of human resources in the army. The regime pulled back to defensible territory and was left in control of a rump coastal strip representing around 1/6 of the country. Russian jets are not enough for victory. It would likely take tens of thousands of troops to recapture and hold cities like Aleppo and Raqqa. Russia is in a perilous position, internationally isolated and enduring economic turmoil, and now Putin is plunged into the unknown. Moscow doesn't have experience coordinating military operations with Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. This is Russia's first military expedition outside of its immediate sphere of influence since the end of the Cold War. Putin has also pinned his fortunes on a highly incompetent dictator. Assad's policies of systematic torture and barrel bombing of civilians brewed the hell broth in Syria. So Putin's pinning himself on Assad is what remember, this is all, mouthpiece BS as far as I'm concerned. And two can play at the great game of proxy warfare. Patrons of the Syrian insurrection, like Turkey and the Gulf states, may match Russian intervention by stepping up their own assistance to rebels, in the form, for example, of anti-aircraft missiles. During the 1980s, the Soviet Union's counterinsurgency war in Afghanistan unraveled in part because the CIA provided ground-to-air Stinger missiles to the Mujahideen. To get a sense of what could await Putin, look at Iran's experience in Syria. When Tehran first chose to aid Assad, it likely didn't realize that Syria would become a sinkhole that would cost hundreds of Iranian military personnel and tens of billions of dollars. Or consider Iran's Lebanese proxy Hezbollah, which marched over the border to save Assad and subsequently lost around 1,200 to 1,700 fighters in a seemingly endless morass. In other words, Putin's war may very well fail, but if it does, he will make concessions. Will he make concessions and abandon his ally? If the Russian president acts rationally, he should cut his losses. Putin, however, may not act rationally. When I researched my book on military disaster, The Right Way to Lose a War, I was struck by how poorly governments tend to handle battlefield reversals. From the United States in Vietnam to the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, leaders often respond to defeat with disastrous decisions that only worsen their plight. Rather than coolly looking for a way out of the predicament, they rage against the dying of the light. Part of the problem is what psychologists call loss aversion. Losing hurts twice as bad as winning feels good, whether in a tennis match or a war. The idea of accepting even a small loss can seem intolerable, and people are tempted to risk greater losses for a shot at the win. The gambler who drops $20 in a casino doesn't walk away, he doubles his bets. In a similar vein, the president who loses 1,000 soldiers in Vietnam doesn't end the war, he sends 500,000 Americans into the mire. It's hard to imagine Putin accepting defeat. He has cultivated an image as the father of the Russian people who is restoring the country as a world power. If Assad's regime falls, Russia could lose its only military installation outside of the former USSR, the naval base in Tartus, Syria. Therefore, if the war effort collapses, Putin may want to salvage something from the wreckage, potentially moving the conflict into a dangerous new phase. He could intensify Russian airstrikes or deploy little green men, as the Russian soldiers serving unofficially in eastern Ukraine were called. Once Russian troops start dying in Syria, all bets are off. Anyway, I don't want to finish this, Dad. It goes on to basically point out how Putin the maniac might just escalate it. And I say that's kind of silly because, who's loaning him the money to just go start a war that he can't win? Just like in America. Who sent all those Americans to die? Lyndon Johnson made that decision by himself? Why'd those military men keep going after that? What'd they get out of it? What was the point of all that? Their own ego, one man's ego? What an absurd journalistic attempt to sell me on the fact that these people are all under the, Putin's deciding it. Yeah, if Putin says they're just going to, like in the days of Napoleon, right? So anyway, Dad, I think that what it demonstrates is that we're getting closer, but it's not happening overnight. But all the pieces are still coming into place in the way that we've been seeing them for, a year, 5 years, but at least lately, the way we've been seeing the Russian intervention. I said it won't lead to war yet. This is not the war with Russia. I said that we got to watch for this uprising of the good king that's going to be the caliph. We got to watch for the Shia Sunni civil war that Sheikh Imran Hussein is talking about. We got to watch for the threat against Israel so that the good Sunni king can be that saving grace that stops the threat and allows Israel to rebuild their temple and goes forth conquering and to conquer the rest of these bad extremists that don't want to give in to that, won't give in because he's part, obviously the good Sunni king is going to be, friends with, he's going to be supported by France and England, America, Israel. All these countries are going to fall in with that. Turkey's not, see? Turkey's going to object, and Iran is going to object, and Egypt and those people are going to object. That's where you're going to find, I think, your original radicals that are pulling radical moves because they don't like this new caliphate. That's why he's got to go forth into Libya, Egypt, Saudi Arabia conquering. And then Turkey sees the writing on the wall, and they're not going to put up with it, and Iran. And that's why it just keeps leading to war and famine and death. But at some point in that, he's going to, this is the part that still seems a little confusing to me. At what point of all that does the fight against Israel come? Is it at the very end, or is it before? Is it because of the fights against Israel that now Iran and Turkey and those sort of countries, Russia, start getting into the fight? So anyway, we'll have to watch and see that, Dad. But for this week, what I see coming, into focus is definitely the Sunni Shia thing. And for me, it's the confirmation that, that's what this ISIS fight's been. We're over there killing the Shias. And one of the final, the coup de grace here is the Saudi Arabia. We executed one of these Shia clerics, and Iran is no too happy about it. But I still see it as we've been there so long that their string is being pulled. Iran is being, they're going to come forth at the right time because the right people are going to give them the green light and say, now it's time to go attack those son of a guns. Just like right now, they're given the money comes for them to go spread their fight into these other places. Why do they put the money into the bombs and the weaponry and the military? Who funds all that in these religious theocratic countries? Why don't they all look like Gandhi's India to a certain extent? Dad, why have we got a bunch of the world simply being passive people who don't fight and don't allow that in their world? They don't allow militarization in their country and their continent. I mean, that's what Gandhi was sort of going for, right? So I find it interesting that all of these religious countries have the biggest militaries and can't wait to go kill other people for territory. But definitely, you can see it coming to the surface now. Saudi Arabia, things are not status quo over there, and the prophecy says, or would seem to, that this false Messiah or the false Caliph is going to go get the oiliest, the king of the north is going to go after the oiliest of the regions, as well as Egypt and Libya, which have been made bare, and Ethiopia. So anyway, Dad, thanks for having me on. Love you. I'll talk to you next week.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right, and it was another superb analysis of this week's happenings in the news in the Middle East. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube. And comment, drop us a line, subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.